Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So if you follow the channel, especially the vintage content, now I don't do all that much these days because there's just not much of it here in San Diego other than my own perfectly running vintage Vespas. We did a full refurbishment of the motor, specifically the bottom end. I didn't reuse the top end because there was no reason to really service it. I rode around for 40-50 miles. It ran great. Rode it all in the hills a couple months ago. The owner of it has it, and she called me up and she said it made a little pop and died out. And I was like, oh, well, is it the clutch? Is it the piston? She was thinking it might be the clutch because there's just no resistance. So I could see the flywheel spinning in there. So right when it arrived, there's no compression. And that's what I mean by compression is you have like, whenever the piston comes atop its center, it builds up pressure and you could feel that through the Kickstarter. So no compression at all, no sense in even hooking up a compression gauge to kind of get a benchmark. Typically with the P200 motor, and if you did have a compression gauge like the one I have, a snap-on gauge, they all read a little bit different. A good top end should read like 110 to 120 PSI with wide open throttle. I'm not going to demo that, but plenty of videos out there on how to use a compression gauge. But usually that gives you an idea of the health of the top end, specifically the piston rings, and the cylinder. Well, I know one thing, there's just no compression whatsoever, but the motor's turning over with a lot of ease. So let's get right to it and see what we find. All right, so get the cowl out of the way. So the first thing I'll look at, it's got oil injection. I see oil in the line, that's good. The oil line's not loose or anything. We'll pull the spark plug cap off. You know, when you have a motor that doesn't run, some of the basics you check is make sure it has spark, and a lot of times I'll just put a plug right up against here and kick it through, but we don't have compression, so that's probably our problem right here. You're gonna need a 13/16 spark plug wrench. You can also use the little T-handle. I'd always suggest having an extra spark plug and that T-handle basic wrench because it has enough tools to change a spark plug and also change a wheel on a vintage Vespa. Pretty important task that you may need to do. It's got the electric start, so I'll just unthread the spark plug. It's got the BR7ES, which is the correct plug. It's a long reach 7-range plug. So the plug initially looks pretty good. It doesn't have that much coke buildup, which is like the oil that builds up on it. It's kind of a brownish color, but I also see kind of a real slight aluminum color to it. And usually that would be an indication. If I see little particles of metal on there, or a little bit of aluminum color, that could be an indication that you're pre-detonating or the piston is starting to deteriorate and aluminum from the pistons depositing on the spark plug. Normally you're looking for something like I would say a dark tan to a chocolate brown, kind of is an ideal plug at wide open throttles. Really hard to get a good plug chop. Usually you got to do a new plug and run it wide open throttle and cut the ignition. That's usually how you can get a good timestamp of if the motor's running lean or rich. If it came out like bone white, it's running really lean. If it's just light tan, it's probably the stoichiometric ratio, which is probably still a little too lean for a vintage 2-stroke motor. So we're gonna get this fan cover out of the way and start dismantling the top end. So I'm gonna need the big flat screwdriver to get that center screw out. We also have a spring we'll get out of the way of the exhaust. And I'll show you some tips and tricks on getting this all apart pretty easily. It's pretty cool. You can take the top end off the motor while it's in the frame. I might have covered it on a past video, but you don't necessarily need to remove the whole motor, and I'll show you how that all works. So this scooter has an aftermarket exhaust system on it, and it does have this extra spring, which is actually a good idea because oftentimes the mufflers just don't hold onto the spigot, and I'll use one of these spring hooks to detach that part. You have this lower mount with the little spring hook bracket. So that's all aftermarket stuff. That's not what it would have, if it was a completely bone stock scooter, it wouldn't have any of that stuff. Then we got the big flat screw right here. That's actually an original part. Pull that out. And the last part, I got the wires out of the way. And you got a single screw that holds it to the fan shroud. So now we'll pull the cylinder shroud out of the way. So it's kind of, sometimes it will bind up, sometimes it will melt a little bit to the cylinders. Might replace this because this has kind of run hot and melted this cylinder shroud. I'll probably just replace out and remember it being that bad. So it definitely was running pretty hot on a hot day. So next we'll get a 13 millimeter and we'll loosen the exhaust spigot right here. You don't need to remove the nut all the way. And then you're going to need a 17 millimeter combination wrench. We're not going to even remove the muffler or the rear tire. Typically you need to remove the rear tire to take the muffler off. So I got a 17 millimeter ratchet style combination wrench. They're pretty handy to have. You can find like Gear Wrench brand, or I mean, there's quite a few different brands of them now. So we'll get it on that large exhaust bolt. And all we want to do is just have it loose, but we're not going to remove it. So this one even articulates, but I'm leaving the tire in position because my goal is to get this done quick and not pull the whole motor out to do a top end. This is all stuff with these basic tools you could probably pull off doing on the side of the road if you really needed to. Say you were on a cross-country trip. You probably take note of what tools I have. All right, so usually you use like a little flat chisel. This aftermarket pipe doesn't have much of a weld. If it's a stock pipe, usually they got a nice little weld that you could just tap on, but I find it just enough of the weld. And then it just drops right out of the way. Still on there loose, and I'll be able to pull it right back up onto that exhaust stub spigot when we reassemble the motor, or the top end of the motor. All right, so the 13 millimeter socket, I tend to like to work with a 1/4 inch drive. You just get more feel for it. Sometimes you have the spacer without a nut underneath it. Sometimes there's also a nut under there. If there's a nut underneath that spacer, you want to just remove the spacer, then I'm going to crack these 4 nuts, and they're all pretty loose. Go a little bit more, another 1/8 of a turn, and just to prevent warping the head. So now they're all loose. You got the washers in there. Pick the 8 millimeter nuts. If all the hardware is pretty old, I just suggest replacing it all. It's pretty inexpensive. The spacer you can reuse. And there's washers. You could use a magnet to kind of fish them out, but typically I'll just kind of work the head out of the way. It's a little harder with the extra wiring for the electric start here. And we'll kind of work the head off. We can just dump all the washers. Looks pretty clean in here because I did clean that surface of the head. Get a bit of oil leakage. That's pretty normal because they don't run a head gasket. I think when I assemble the motor, you could lap the head into the cylinder, but they're always going to weep a little bit of that 2-stroke oil. And there's a hole. You see the piston's probably like 3 millimeters thick. I just burned a hole. And I'll kind of, as I'm disassembling, I'll talk about why that would occur. So we'll turn it over. The cylinder looks pretty good. I don't see any like major scorings like it had any seize events. You're gonna wanna remove these cylinder studs. Two ways to go about it. If you're a professional, you have various tools that extract the studs. This thread's on here, it's a really old school tool. And then you tighten it down and it will clamp these collars onto the threads of that stud and you'll be able to remove it. Another one is this style, which kind of has like a one-way clutch in there and it starts just biting. You don't really want to use it on the threads. But the typical home mechanic, you just want to take those exhaust nuts, and this is exactly why you want to just have new ones. And we'll be able to reuse them too. So pretty much, no pun intended, but you double nut the studs. All right, so to remove the studs, we have the pair of nuts on there. You're gonna need a 13mm combo wrench and just go ahead and tighten them right up against each other, depending on how tight so there you go. And I usually use the combination of I'm tightening this and I'm pushing down on the wrench. And yeah, once you break them free, they're pretty easy to pull out typically. These studs have a little line that indicates that's the top. They have a different thread cut. Even though they're both 8mm, both the top and the bottom, they're cut differently for the bottom versus the top. And you'll be able to remove the nuts if needed, if you don't have them. Better yet, if you had extra ones just kicking around, then you can leave the nuts on the studs and just makes for the job a little easier here. There we go. All right, so all 4 studs are out and we're gonna get the piston to the bottom dead center, which is all the way at the very bottom of the stroke. And at this point, just rock the cylinder off. It's sometimes you may want to pull the piston with it. You may need to send the piston back down. Probably should be wearing gloves because that 2-stroke oil is pretty gooey. And there's a lot of little aluminum flakes in here, so yeah, it looks like the crankshaft probably ate up some of the aluminum. That's actually aluminum flakes in there. The cylinder itself looks pretty good. It definitely needs a thorough washing. The rings are all intact, not broken, that's good. The skirt of the piston's not broken, but I do see a lot of aluminum flakes in there, and typically the crankshaft can, if it's just a whole piston, my experience to just flush it out the best you can, and that's probably what we're gonna do. You may want to use a whole entire can of carburetor or brake cleaner. And we have the clips, and we're gonna go ahead and pull the piston here. All right, so to get the piston out of the way, we got some circlip pliers for removing internal snap rings, so they're set up where they close. We'll do the easy one, which is right here. I'm wearing glasses at this point because they do fly sometimes. And you want to throw those away even if you were going to reuse the piston. Well, sometimes the pin will just slide right out. Not likely though. You may want to have a mirror or just feel your way around. See if I could pull this off. I have a right angle set of circlip pliers. Again, if the motor's out, this is even easier. So I get like a mechanic's mirror, and then I'm able to see the position to get the, as long as the clip's in the right position there, you'll be able to do this. And it's a little hard working through a mirror. Sometimes things want to move around. You may want to even have a light. Got the clip out. There you go, kind of pop, but. So that side can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes the pins will just want to slide on their own. Not likely. You do not want to tap it out with a socket or something that putting strain on the connecting rod. You may even throw the crankshaft out of a true. So there's a chance the crank might be a little bit out of a true from eating aluminum, but aluminum fortunately is pretty soft. If it does go through a motor, it's not a good thing. you're gonna need a piston pin puller. And here's two different styles. You can find one on the Scooter West web store. I kind of like this simple one. Usually they're reverse threads here. You know, if you're on the side of the road and you're real careful, you could tap the pin out. You just want to hold and support the piston. So put it back to the top dead center, just like that. And put the little spacer that catches the, and just start unthreading, and it's going to pull the pin right through. And the pins inside here. Typically a new piston kit will come with a new pin. So I think it's a Meteor piston is the brand. And we got the wrist pin bearing. You typically want to replace it. We'll look at the slashes on the crankshaft, but kind of want to feel the main bearing. It doesn't feel crunchy at all. Things happen pretty quick when it probably blew the hole and just kind of polluted the inside of the crankcase with this combination of grease and the little broken segments of the molten aluminum that went in there. And oftentimes you may be able to even see what was the size. I see 66 dot, but it was kind of melted and pre-igniting right there, so it kind of melted that out. But we're going to do some measurements. We'll figure out what piston this is. And I'll kind of determine if this cylinder is going to be salvageable. I'm going to clean up for a second. I'll get a tray under here. And then we'll just, so first course of action, since we're just going to reuse the bottom end parts, we're going to clean out the bottom end the best we can. Use something like brake spray parts cleaner here. Probably want to protect, if you have a nice paint job, unlike this scooter here, probably want to protect the paint job, and you know, especially blast out the big end bearing. You can kind of get to the side. It feels really, really smooth, which is the good part. But this is where it gets messy, kind of when we're flushing out the material. And we're gonna go between blasting it with the brake spray cleaner and also compressed air. We'll probably get the camera out of the way for the compressed air. All right, so we'll do this several more times. Probably I'll spend this whole entire can or pretty close to all, just to repeatedly flush it to try to get as much aluminum as we can out of this bottom end. It looks much, much cleaner just on that first round. Now I'll do the same on the cylinder, kind of flush all the ports out with solvent. Probably just bring it in my parts washer. It's a little more effective than. So I'm trying to clean up the cylinder kind of the best I can. It's pretty hard to clean the ports out, especially when they got debris in them. You may want to use like a little wire, you know, like a little nylon bristle brush. You got the transfer ports, there's going to be 3 of them. Just to get any of the grit out. There's going to be a lot more steps to cleaning it before we put it back in. But I just want to get clean enough where I can inspect the cylinder. And if I didn't have gloves on, I usually would run my nail all the way around. If there's anything I can catch, it's probably, it may be a candidate just to send out to get bored. It just looks a little glazed in a couple areas, maybe. I think it's in really great shape. I'm gonna send a ball hone down it. I know most do-it-yourselfers aren't gonna have that. You can also use the 3-stone style hone. They're a little bit harder to use and they tend to catch the ports. Here at the shop for years, I've now had the whole set of ball hones for 50 cc up to these 200s, even some of the 250s. Not a common thing with the new scooters. Oftentimes you just replace the parts, you know, brand new cylinder and piston. That's also an option for this scooter. You may just want to start with a brand new piston and cylinder that's already matched, ready to install. All right, so here's a ball hone. Typically if you put new rings, a piston, always want to hone the cylinder, put new crosshatch in there for the piston rings, the seat. A simple cylinder on these older scooters, you could do it with hand tools. Much more modern engines, hence why you just replace these parts. They have much more precision machines for doing this kind of operation, putting that initial hone in a cylinder. These are abrasive little balls on like nylon wires. They're called a ball hone. They're one of the easiest hones to use. And it just has just enough friction in there. You could run it dry. Typically you want to just put a real light coat of cutting oil, even something like WD-40, just something really light. So I got, you know, an oil that's for cutting. It's called soluble cutting oil. The idea is you can clean it off real easy with a solvent that runs like a water-based solution for a solvent. You don't need much, just a little bit in there. If you have a lot in there, it kind of makes a mess. And we'll get the hone all jigged up and just kind of go in there, and I'm going to go pretty rapid. And I'm kind of looking at the crosshatch that it's making. I want to make sure I'm putting like a 45-degree, and that's based on the speed that you're. And I see a pretty consistent crosshatch all the way around, and that's as far as you need to take it. You no need to keep on going, because if you keep using this, you'll eventually oval out the cylinder bore, you know, and distort the cylinder bore. And if the cylinder bore isn't perfectly round, it's never going to seat to the new rings. All right, so now we have a freshly honed cylinder here. I'm going to take it over to this bench over here. And since I don't know what the measurement is, I could probably look up some past history, maybe have some notes on what size it will be. We'll size up what piston I can use. And I'm kind of like looking around. I see a couple real minor little up and down scores, nothing to be concerned about, but mostly that crosshatch pattern all the way around. That's what I want to look. And you can see how much grit comes out when you wipe the cylinder with a fresh rag. There's going to be several more stages of cleaning the cylinder before we assemble it. So to mic out a cylinder, you're going to need bore gauges, not something everybody has. Oftentimes when you're sizing a piston, it may be best just to take it to somebody who's a professional. Take the cylinder, remove it. I've done this service for customers that walk in. They remove their own cylinder, no problem, and I'll measure their cylinder. Just a regular dial gauge is fine. You can use a vernier if you really want an accurate measurement. Not really necessary for this application. Pretty much just trying to size the piston. And I don't recall the cylinder bore being heavily worn. So we're going to drop that bore gauge in there. They're pretty tricky to use, and you don't want to do it right at the top. You want to do it in a couple midpoints, maybe even do a couple measurements. So then it tightens up. But as you can see, there's certain areas where it's a little looser. So the cylinder is a little bigger. So release it. It should be pretty tight in there with that lock. But see how it still kind of rotates around? So, you know, you got to find the perfect center. And there, I think I got it. Now it's in there, kind of wedged in there. Then you just carefully rock it out without upsetting the measurement. And make sure it's zeroed out. I have it in metric. And make sure this is perfectly square when you're measuring. So the measurement's coming in right at 66.83. The standard size bore would be 66.50 millimeters. If it's a first oversize, it'd be 66.7. And then second oversize is 66.9. So I suspect this accepts a 66.9 second over piston is what was used in here. And I think we'll be fine. We can do several more measurements to make sure I'm right there in that 66.9. It's really hard. Like, I know it's a little larger because right when I drop this back in, I can actually rock it around again. You know, you got to find where it's in a very tight, tight spot. I'm sure somebody that does this all the time is probably even better at it. but you know, we're getting pretty close to what I think it is. And I'll use feeler gauges will be the next next way. So 6683 again. All right, so I have my new piston kit. This is the most common brand. That's a decent quality, is Meteor pistons. The original equipment piston for these was made by a company ASSO out of Italy, ASSO. Sometimes those are available. That's the original equipment piston. I'm sure there's cheaper ones out there too. These we source out of Italy. So here's our 66.9 second over piston. What's included in here? Let's see. So we got a new pin, the piston itself, circlips and rings. So, and there's our circlips. So you can see 66.9, there's an arrow on there. That arrow points towards the exhaust. So we'll just do a little test of the piston. It's best to do them from the bottom. Just drop that in there. Feels pretty good. Has not necessarily any friction. I'll kind of do it on side, but just the initial little rock test, you know, just rocking the piston feels good. It's not clicking around in there. The clearances are a lot greater on these older motors compared to much newer engines. So I'm gonna see if I can get a 3000 feeler gauge. These are extra long feeler gauges, a little harder to find, 0.76 millimeters. We'll see how that goes in between. I'm pretty certain it's gonna be a little larger than that. That's fine. This is kind of my minimum spec, so I'll kind of put it where the arrow is, and it slides in there, slides out really easy. And we keep on going up, and these are fourth, you know, standard. We'll try 4. I want to see if 6/1000 fits in there, binds up the piston, because that's probably the upper limit. Okay, there's quite a bit of friction, so I would say that's a 6/1000 clearance. You know, it's pretty much stuck in there, but I should still move the piston. You don't want to go so large that and push it through and distort the piston. But I would say, based on how much friction there is, that feeler gauge doesn't pull out. We're 0.15 millimeters or 6/1000 of an inch, and that's a good acceptable number. If I had 8, 9, 10 thousandths, time to move on to the next bore size on the cylinder, which would be 66.9, so your 67.1 would be the next, which would be a third over. Typically you can get up to fourth over. Sometimes you can even go as large as a sixth over. The increments are pretty small, you know, being 0.2 of a millimeter between each of the oversizes, from 665, 667, 66.9, 67.1, and so on. So sometimes you even have to skip a piston. Say if this cylinder was heavily damaged with scores in there, the machine shop that would bore this out may want to skip an oversize, you know, go all the way to from second, skip third, go to fourth oversize to get a good cut when they send their boring jig down there to recut the cylinder. Again, it's a lot of work. Not too many machine shops really tackle this kind of job, hence why a lot of people just buy the parts brand new. You can buy a brand new cylinder with a piston. Not much more than the piston, probably about double what the piston is, and you get it's already honed and size ready to be installed. So keep that in mind. As much as you like to save stuff, it's definitely a necessity when we're working on anything that's difficult to find a piston. Maybe a Super Sport or any of the handlebar bikes, any of those are gonna be very, very difficult to find a cylinder. There are some reproduction cylinders out there, and of course there's the whole wild world of cylinder kits, high performance. But you get, you know, a lot of extra, you know, tuning and all the other stuff that goes along with tuning in building up a motor. That's a whole nother realm, and I don't really cover that. It's pretty fun. I had my heyday with tuning Vespas over 25 years ago now, so I'm just kind of into keeping them stock, if you want my stance on it. All right, so we know this is good. We're gonna check the ring end gap. The ring end gap, you can see they have the little notch in there, and they have a pin, you know, they have little pins on the piston. So those notches correspond, but where we measure the ring end gap is where it's the excess that comes out. And typically you just want to slide the ring in very carefully. It's easier done without a glove because sometimes you get the glove. And then you want to use your piston to push it in and square it up. And you want to go beyond where there might be a ridge, you know. Right there is pretty good. And let's measure the gap. Usually Meteor pistons, if the bore is within spec, we're pretty good. So let's see if 10 thou fits in there. A little tighter than 10 thou. 8 thou. Okay, that fits in there. I would say that's probably at the minimum. I probably want to go up a little bit more. I'll file the ring end gaps. Probably get them right to about 10 thou, so 0.25 millimeters. I think the range, you know, they could be all the way up to about 0.4 of a millimeter or 0.5 of a millimeter. I have to look at the book to see what it is, but actually it almost fits in there. It's only ever so slightly needs a little filing. So I'll show you how that's done. All right, so you can either put the file in a vise, or I'm going to cheat a little bit and just hold the rings and have the rings on the table. And this is a pretty fine file. This isn't like a rasp, and they don't need much. You only need a little bit. Pretty easy to take too much material off and kind of wipe off any excess on there. Pretty much just repeat. Have the 10 thou feeler gauge, and it just drops right in. So I think we're good there. Just a tiny bit of filing is all I needed to almost get the feeler gauge in there. So here's our second ring. And they're universal between the top and the bottom. That's not the case with a lot of other styles of pistons. They're just old school cast iron rings. Just about get that feeler gauge in there, and it's just pretty tight. Maybe a little bit less filing. Don't push the ring too far because you'll be on those gaps. And there you go, that fits just fine and just slides. Find a little friction in there, and that's good. So actually I'll set that up as my top ring. So a lot of times when I'll ship a cylinder and piston, I'll ship it in there with the rings not installed, but all set up in there. So the next step is I'm going to really clean this cylinder. And typically, like spray solvents, like don't work so well. The best kind of solvents to clean a cylinder are going to be like a water-based solvent, something like Simply Green that's diluted with some water, and just keep on scrubbing either with a terry towel, which is probably better than one of these green rags, but keep on cleaning until you no longer get any residues. So right there, I'm wiping right now, and I can see it's picking up metal residue. So we want to continually wipe this, and then when we're done, we're going to give it a little quick fogging with WD-40, and ultimately have our two-stroke oil to lubricate the piston. Same with clean up the piston and the rings, since we might have metal shavings and filings on those as well. All right, so here's some diluted purple power cleaner. Don't need a whole bunch. We'll just pretty much keep on repeating until we have a clean cylinder. Same with the ports, you want to clean those. So I'm back at the scooter, and I got an oiler right here with some two-stroke oil in it. Just a regular old two-stroke oil. Since I flushed everything out pretty thoroughly, I kind of want to put some into the bottom end, specifically the big end bearing, and just right between that, and then it's kind of feels really good. The rotary valve looks good. So yeah, ate some aluminum, but I don't think it really made too much of a mess of the cylinder. And then with hopefully clean gloves, very, very small amount of 2-stroke oil, and we'll just put a really light film. You don't need to over oil it, because a lot of times I'll just put the oil on there and then I'll actually wipe it all off. I literally just put like a little bit of a dot of oil on there, and I'll take a piece of this clean rag and just get in there and wipe it out, because the oil's essentially, it's just going in between those little grooves of when we honed it, and that's what's holding the oil. Sometimes if you over oil the cylinders, what I find is you'll end up with the cylinder will like kind of glaze over and the rings won't ever really seat. So kind of wipe all that oil out of there. Another part that's pretty important to oil is the pin. Get to that. So I looked at the end of this stock crank. I see 2 slash marks, or 2 like little cuts in there. And is what you want to do is have a bearing that's sized up. These come in 4 different sizes. I think they have a 1 slash, a 2 slash, a 3 slash, and a 4 slash. So this is a category 3 bearing. So the way it works is you want to have a number that sums up as 5. And that's specific for the 200 motor with the 16mm pin. So I have a number 3 bearing in a rod that has a number 2. And take the brand new pin. It feels really, really good in there. I looked inside the small end. It turns pretty good, it's pretty quiet. There's no oil on it right now, but just put a film of oil onto that wrist pin bearing, kind of do the same thing, kind of just work it in there. Now it's nice and quiet because there's oil on there. And I think we're all set. There's like no play whatsoever. A little bit of rod going side to side, that's normal. I'm not going to measure it, but there is a measurement for that. Just 2 brass thrust bearings on the crankshaft. They do wear out, especially if you have a crank that's really out of true. That's where you might have excessive play side to side, but just give it a little look, it looks fine. We have the piston right here. The arrow faces down, so just think of the piston's going to go like that. The clip on the backside, we're going to go ahead and install that right now. So they come in this little bag. Brand new clips. Anytime you take them off, you want to replace them. You use those circlip pliers. I usually like to find the sharper edge of the clip. Kind of see it because they're stamped out, and we'll have that facing out. So we're going to go ahead, use my circlip pliers. A little hard sometimes, probably could use one size up. And the gap is going to be either at the top, so either 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock is where you want the gap for these old style. So I got a more appropriately sized circlip pliers. I'll kind of show you. So the back side of the piston, we're going to drop that in. Make sure it goes into the groove. It's very easy not to get it into the groove. You want to check it, you may want to poke at it. If you're, I know that went into the groove. Very easy for it to look like it's in there, and it will pop right out when the engine's running. I can tell you that little clip is going to do far more damage than a little bit of melted piston, you know, from what just occurred. So I'm going to leave the bearing behind in the connecting rod, and we'll put the pin in. And when it's a nice fresh pin on a fresh piston, you can see I don't even need that puller to slide it in or out. So kind of set the piston like that. And I had my top ring that I determined was a little tighter. Usually I just run that. I'm going to see how I could do this because I actually have the special tool for putting these in. So there's the little half moon, and you have the pin facing up on this lower ring gap. I'm going to see if I could pull this off, especially with the gloves on. So you just want to spread the rings. There's a specific tool for this. And the hard part is getting past that first groove. And the glove doesn't help either, because see how the glove is stuck in there? There's another trick where you could put like a feeler gauge in the you know, to kind of keep the piston ring off, I was kind of able to release the grip on that my glove there. And the next thing before we seat the ring is I want to get it out of that top clip position. The last ring is going to be much easier. So kind of cheat, use a little tool. And there we have it. So it's right there. You can see the little gap kind of lines up with the pin. And that's how two-stroke pistons are set up. And we'll do the top ring, kind of pretty much the same kind of setup. This is much easier because you can kind of just roll the ring in. A lot of times you do the first time, you end up breaking a piston ring, and it's floating in there just fine, no issues there. And the next step is we're going to stuff the piston into the cylinder. So put that on the rag, have that light coat of oil. We're going to put the gasket. They normally have a pin if it's a stock case. This case doesn't use that, it just uses the studs that line the cylinder. Drop that gasket right in place. You can use some silicone sealant if you want to kind of hold it in place. And again, this is going to be a little difficult with the glove on. I prefer to do it without the gloves, but let's see how I can do it. So the arrow, we're going to approximately face it towards the exhaust port. And I'm kind of tipping the piston in, and I'm taking care that the piston's in that gap there. So we're pretty close. Sometimes I'll use a small screwdriver to kind of send the piston ring into its groove. These large pistons are or the large thicker pistons on these old engines are much easier than modern engines that have really thin piston rings. They're pretty fragile. They're chromoly or made out of other exotic metals. These are just plain old cast iron rings. Give it a couple rocks, and I think we're in. So I just have it right here where it's not, the piston isn't even past this little port right here. You don't want to push it too far yet because we may need to rotate the piston. See how it has that free play? That's good because that means the rings are floating in the grooves. We'll get the pin out just like that. And typically I like to have one of the studs ready to go, especially a cylinder like this that doesn't have the dowel pin. So we have a little bit of oil on all these parts right here. I have the wrist pin with that wrist pin bearing. I'm gonna lift this whole assembly. Should be wearing my safety glasses again, but decided not to. So kind of push this in. Start to kind of get the pin in there, and then we're going to need to start pulling the cylinder. Yeah, turn the crankshaft there, and you're going to need to kind of feel your way around to get the pin in there. You're not jamming anything, you're just being very easy on everything. There's nothing that needs to be jammed. And at this point, I have the pin almost home. This is where it may be safe to actually give it a couple little taps with a mallet. But usually driving them out, you just need to it kind of just bottomed out on the other clip there. Get our gasket back out of the way before we distort it. And at this point, we'll put the second brand new clip. Pretty much the same steps. Find the sharper edge of the clip, put it on a good quality set of circlip pliers. And I'm kind of using my finger to kind of help guide that clip in, and it's in the groove. I'm going to pull it out. So the gap is actually at the 12 o'clock if you're looking at the top of the piston. Get a little bit of oil in there. There we go. So we'll get the gasket kind of in position right here. I'm going to put one of the studs through just to kind of keep our gasket centered. And at this point, everything's pretty much lining up. And we'll start putting the studs back in to kind of keep everything centered, just get them started there. All the rest of them should just line right up, no problems. All right, so they're all started, and we're gonna bottom out all 4 of the studs. And I still find this, even though you gotta take some extra steps, things are a little harder to get to, still much easier than pulling the engine. I'd probably, if I was doing it in my shop environment, I'd be using power ratchets. I would have used the stud extractors. A lot of tools that help speed up the whole process. Like in a shop environment without shooting a video, I could probably do this whole job start to finish, maybe 30 to 45 minutes. Have a fresh top end on a vintage Vespa here. So some of the reasons that you would end up pulling a piston, I would say the most likely culprit is the ignition is too advanced. And my instinct, the stock setting on these P200s is 23 degrees, and it's a fixed timing system, so that means it never adjusts whether it's idle speed or maximum RPMs. It's supposed to be approximately 23 degrees. And I'm pretty certain that's what I set it. I remember finding top dead center, making some additional marks. There are some basic marks on the flywheel, give you kind of a rough idea where the timing is. My thoughts is this scooter was used on a hot day at wide open throttle, and the combustion temperatures are just a little too hot for this close to stock setup. It does have a different muffler on it. You know, obviously that changes things a little bit, specifically the jetting. I think it does have like a 120 or 122 jet, so it's a little richer than with the original stock setup. If it's a bone stock scooter, kind of like my Rally 200, it'd be a 116 main jet on these 200 cc's. If you don't have oil injection, you go to about 118 for the main jet. But based on looking at that spark plug, which is essentially like a little bit of a timestamp of when the motor blew up, or blew a hole, it didn't blow up, it blew a hole in the piston. You know, the jetting I think was correct. Is what I suspect is it just has a little bit too much timing. The fuel may have been low grade and old. I know the scooter sat for a couple months in between, you know, when I built it, so it probably has some pretty old fuel in there. And you may want to start with fresh, high octane fuel. And I'm probably going to pull a little bit of timing out. So I'm going to set the fixed timing on this stock, or fairly stock Vespa, probably to about 21 degrees. Is what it does do is it affects your low end torque. So one thing about the cylinder is we did do some modifications to it. The work with that, the electric start fins, they come in within really close proximity. I turned over the motor a couple times, and whatever remaining oil that's at the top, usually you want to wipe that off because it might have little chunks of debris with it, and you last a little bit of dirt. You can see it just grabbed a little bit of metal and dirt. And at this point, we'll clean that surface where the head seats. We're going to go ahead and clean the head and install the head. All right, so we have a cleaned off head. This has some old copper gasket spray. Everything's clean. Carefully slide that on there. Put 4 flat washers onto the studs here. Kind of get your fingers just barely in there. In between the fins, that is. Then we'll do the split washers. They still look like they're in pretty good shape. They still have a little bit of springiness to them, kind of the old style of a lock washer, but that's just the way they did it from the beginning. You could use something fancy like a Nordlock lock washer in here, you know, to replace both the flat and the split washer, but the engineers said it worked fine. Yeah, I find it's good enough for these stock bikes. Yeah, there's better fasteners for if you're building a high performance motor. Even a stock motor, you could use some more sophisticated fasteners on here, but it is regular grade 8.8 nuts. Getting them all started. And the next steps is I'll take my little 1/4 inch ratchet and just kind of go between each of them here. And they're all kind of just seated right now. Still a little bit of scrape on that. It like cranks out the true a little bit, that's what it is. A little bit of this ring gear just barely touches the cylinder. I don't think it's that much of an issue. I need to clearance it more. So right here, kind of have it as tight as I want to go by hand. And then I can get a torque wrench in here, do about 16 foot-pounds. All right, so I have a torque wrench set to 16 foot-pounds. We'll go to about 10 on all of them here, kind of in a crisscross fashion. I'm kind of watching the display on this. Could do a set point. And then we'll do our next one. Get right to 16, which is about another 1/4 inch or a 1/4 turn. And there's our final torque. Start with a brand new B7 or BR7 ES when we assemble it. We need to get the exhaust spigot back on. A lot of times you just muscle it on. I might put a better setup to hold the cables away. And usually you just want to use some type of punch to kind of send it. Pretty much goes as far as you could go with that. And then we'll go ahead and tighten this. If you do want to torque it, about 16 foot-pounds, just like the head. And we'll come back. I'm going to put a new shroud on it, but I do want to start it with a new spark plug. We'll also go on, I'll go on the back side and tighten that, the 17 millimeter, to get my 17 millimeter combo and tighten the muffler. All right, so we're going to put a new plug in here. Since the scooter's used at higher speeds and it's still pretty hot, and I would just suggest going to even one heat range colder on the plug. So the NGK system, if you go up on the numbers, a colder plug. So what that means is the actual insulator and electrode in the center is a little shorter. The downside of that is if you're in stop and go traffic on a colder day, it's more likely gonna foul out. You can see that the electrode goes further in here. It's kind of hard to see. The gap's usually set pretty good, about 6 to 7/10 of a millimeter. And we'll thread a new spark plug in here. No sense in checking the compression, but usually I'll run a motor like around for a few miles, check the compression, just see what it's looking like, and then you can check it after another 100 miles, and it should even be a little bit better after 100 miles of operation. So, again, every compression gauge is going to measure a little different, so hard to compare an apple to an orange with compression gauges here. Then we'll take the little electrode in. I'm not going to put the fan cover on or do the spring. I just want to start the motor. I'll likely replace the cylinder shroud since that was so melted. This off. Put that on. Got some junk on here. This has that magic button on the scooter, so we'll see what happens here. So turn the fuel on. May need some choke. It might be a little flooded because I put all that spray solvent in there. Sometimes that's flammable and we'll just start on its own. So see what happens. Kind of stand clear, prop clear. There you go. Sounds pretty good. I took it off choke right away. It's a pretty warm day. It's the first start. It's got a little bit of a lean spot off idle. So you may want to change the slide. And I can see the oil, this small bubble in the oil line. It's moving along actually right here. So that's indicating my oil pump's working. I had no reason to believe that the oil pump failed because I would have seen like a cylinder seize and not a hole burned in the cylinder, but sounds pretty good. I'll do some further tuning, and of course I'm going to set the timing, retard it a little bit, and we know our oil pump's working, and I may mess with the jetting just ever so slightly. That's always what you run into when you start changing out stuff, like have a different pipe that's a higher performance pipe, such as this road pipe. It's really close to stock, but it still isn't an original stock motor. Even the replacement parts for vintage Vespas, the tolerances and how they're built are all a little bit different, and you may need to tune accordingly, is what I've found in the years. Same with the modern gas. Here in California, it's got like 10 to 15% ethanol. That changes how it runs. It actually leans the motor out. So feels pretty good. A little bit of warmth in the cylinder. Obviously you don't want to run it too long without that cylinder shroud. I'll put a brand new one on there. But pretty much just want to share with you something like the finding of a hole in the piston and what I would do about it. Probably if you're looking for perfection, I would completely take the motor all the way apart, check that crankshaft for true and any damage inside the piston, but it looked really clean after I did a pretty thorough flush. So I think we're all set there. Roby here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. It's your first time coming across one of my vintage videos. I've done several over the last like 15 years, including complete overhauls of P200, pretty much any of the rotary valve vintage bikes from 1959 and on are all pretty similar. So if you have a rally, a sprint, VBB, all the steps are pretty much very, very similar between the models, even to the very last of the shifty scooters like this P200 here. We'll see you on the next one. Robot from Vespa Motorsport.